Happy Saturday to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to this week's video on hurricane season. It is now May 5th, 2024, so we are less than a month away now from the hurricane season, as it's said on the title card. And as we look at the countdown till June 1st, which is the first day of the hurricane season, it is indeed 28 days away, and it is less than a month. So we're basically in the end game now, as they would say, in the final stretches, and before you know it, hurricane season will be uh, quite literally right upon us. Before I get to everything that I usually talk about in the weekly videos that we do, since we're in May, I thought, why not we look at climatology a little bit, since we're getting much closer to the hurricane season. And let's take a look at where tropical cyclones usually develop, because the National Hurricane Center does indeed have a point of origin for the first week of May. And as you can see, this is typically why we really don't have, or we don't look for development that often in May, because look at what we have in the Atlantic. Basically nothing from the first 10 days of May, except for maybe a few points of origin in the Caribbean. But as these weeks goes on, as we get closer towards June, we're going to start seeing more of these points filled up. And then by June, you'll start to see we'll have a lot more development here. And I guess this also goes to show why I guess the Eastern Pacific doesn't start before May 15th, because within the first 10 days of May, typically, we don't even see anything in the Eastern Pacific at all. So that is actually quite interesting that we have points of origin in the Atlantic, but not even in the Eastern Pacific. I guess sometimes things that we gotta question. But either way, in May right now, we're still a month away from the season. Well, slightly less than a month away, but you get the point. We're not still quite in hurricane season yet, and we still are not actively looking for development just yet. We still have to wait a few more weeks till we see that. Really quickly though, let's take a look at what's going on across the globe, because we're not looking at active development right now in the Atlantic, but there is actually stuff going on in the southwestern Indian Ocean, and this is actually a rare, somewhat rare, very late season system that they're having. It's actually equivalent to what they're having right now, kind of equivalent, I guess you could say, to us having maybe a late November to early December storm in the Atlantic. This is Tropical Cyclone Hidaya, I think so. Not quite sure of the pronunciation, but it is a system in the southwestern Indian Ocean. I think this is actually close to hurricane strength, if I'm not mistaken, and this will head into portions of southwestern Africa, and I think Tanzania, I think, is where they're actually going to see impacts from this, and it is quite rare that they do get tropical cyclone impacts. So very interesting storm they have indeed in the southwestern Indian Ocean, and it just goes to show impact tropical cyclones do occur outside of the Atlantic and the northern hemisphere, and they can occur anywhere in the globe. And in fact, we have one right now in the southwestern Indian Ocean, tropical cyclone Hidaya. I think that's how you pronounce it. Whatever. Moving on though to the Atlantic and what we're looking at here, at least in the Western Hemisphere right now. This is the NOAA Coral Reef Watch. Sea surface temperature anomalies. The Atlantic remains to be very, very warm. In fact, very, very alarming how warm it is. Widespread 1, even 2 degrees Celsius anomaly stretched out across the entire MDR. And the Gulf is warming up too as well. The Gulf is really not that much of a concern with how warm it is until we get to around June or July in the early season, obviously, when we start seeing actual development. But nonetheless, the Gulf is very warm, and this is going to fuel severe weather season as well, because it is ongoing right now and ongoing very strong. We've basically been having large, destructive, violent tornadoes almost every single day now. We've been having it since last week. It's kind of been incredible, and it's only going to continue, especially because of how warm the Gulf is. Gulf moisture will be pulled up into the United States, and of course, as we have these digging troughs from the northwest come down, that'll just be a breeding ground for severe weather season, especially as we head into May, because May is the peak of severe weather season, and that's when we'll really see things light up, especially in the plains, where there is Tornado Alley and where there is severe weather season actively going on right now. And there's actually severe weather going on right now in that area, and we'll look at that in just a little bit too. But the Atlantic remains very warm. The signal is there at this point that this season will indeed be a very active hurricane season, as well as the Pacific. La Nina continues to onset. Cold anomalies beginning to show up solidly along the equatorial Pacific, and we're basically at this point away and completely exiting El Nino at this point now. The latest value in the Nino 3.4 region at only zero point 0.5 Celsius. So right on the threshold of El Nino is where we are right now. So basically we're basically over with this El Nino. It's coming to a close, and before you know it, we'll see La Nina completely upon us. And remember, if we remember this map, we could see it below the surface too, that this La Nina has been ongoing. All these anomalies, really quickly, just to go back to this map, we see all these blue anomalies showing up along the equatorial Pacific right now. For months, if we go back to this map, the sea surface temperature anomalies below the surface, we've talked about all these colder anomalies that were a few months ago all the way out here in the central to western Pacific, and once they move east, they'll then move up and begin to break along the surface and help break up any sort of El Nino we have. Well, now that's happening, and because of that, we're starting to see these anomalies translate to the actual surface along the Pacific, and of course, with that, La Nina will indeed be coming at some point this year. The climate models saw it, we all saw it coming, and now it is happening indeed. La Nina is on its way, and it'll probably be on its way during the hurricane season. It'll fuel a very active hurricane season, obviously. And obviously now, since we are getting closer to hurricane season, now since we're in May, we could actually start taking a look at other things that we kind of look at more, kind of things we kind of look at during the hurricane season instead of in the off season. And one of that, I did actually introduce this last week. This is the 850 millibar vorticity. Kind of take a look at what the spin looks like in the atmosphere. And the biggest thing that I want to use this is to see, because we have all this vorticity right now in the mid latitudes still, because it is spring. And this is still part of the winter pattern that we kind of see still in place right now, which is why we don't get a lot of development, if any at all, in May, although we've seen development in May over the last several years. But kind of why May is not considered yet a part of hurricane season, because we still have yet to see all this vorticity in the mid latitudes pick up and go north. And once that happens, we'll start to see all this vorticity we see right now in the mid latitudes begin to fill up in the deep tropics as we start getting these tropical waves to come off of Africa, which we don't really have yet, which is why we kind of see things all quiet and we don't really have many pockets of vorticity in the MDR. A little bit in the Caribbean, but nothing is seemingly going to develop out of that, at least as of right now. But you get the point. Right now, not much going on in the deep tropics, at least when it comes to vorticity. But once again, watch as all of this moves north in the coming weeks, as we head into June and we start getting a Bermuda high begin to set up just off the East Coast. And that's when we start seeing the ITCZ lift north, and we start seeing these tropical waves fill up along the MDR. And speaking of tropical waves, another map we could look at is the satellite of Africa. Obviously, not much going on right now since there's not really any tropical wave action yet. The African monsoon is not really turned on quite yet, but you can see there is still pockets of energy in Africa right now. This thunderstorm leaving off the coast. I'm not sure where this is, but I think maybe around Liberia. This is leaving the coast, and there's also some energy around Eastern Africa, I think around Ethiopia, or generally that area. Maybe this could be something that we watch as it progresses westward, and maybe we might as well have our first tropical wave very soon, but not really looking like that will be the case right now. It's still only early May, and we really don't see tropical waves typically, or I at least think that typically we don't really see tropical waves start emerging off the coast of Africa around mid to late May. So we're still on schedule. We're not, seeing any crazy things like development in May in the MDR. That is not happening, or at least it doesn't seem like it'll be happening right now. But nonetheless, well, it'll be interesting to see as we go over the next few weeks. As the next few weeks progress, it'll be interesting to see how Africa begins to light up, and we start getting these impulses of energy over Africa that'll eventually come off and become our first tropical waves of the season in the Atlantic. Moving on, though, from that, moving on from things we'll be watching over the next few weeks, we do have climate model now out for May, the climate model data that we typically look at, looking at the CANSIPs. And I posted about this on Twitter, and the CANSIPs is honestly quite incredible, given the fact that it is May and we've seen these signals basically since January. We've seen these really active hurricane season signals that were forecasted on all these climate models, and the fact that now we're in May and they're still showing them to a point that is even more aggressive than maybe what they were showing in January. It is quite incredible, and we'll just look at the CANSIPs really quickly. This is for June. Lots of activity, obviously, in the deep tropics. Probably some strong tropical waves that we'll see in June, and even some Caribbean. Lots of Caribbean precipitation. That probably means we'll have a lot of strong tropical waves this season. Although I did see people talk about the potential that around the start of June, maybe something could get going in the Caribbean. Not entirely sure, not entirely quite sure about that, since it is only early May and we still have almost a month away to get to June. But some people have talked about that, and I mean, it's possible. If we look at the CANSIPs for June, they do indicate lots of precipitation in and around the Caribbean and even near Central America too. So very active look for June. And as we progress, July, very active. You can maybe wonder how active July would be in terms of activity in the Atlantic, but especially interesting how it is very, very wet across the deep tropics, the Caribbean, and most importantly in the Gulf, in the Western Atlantic. And that is where we typically look at when it comes to early season development. But by the time we get to August and September, you can see the CANSIPs going all out in terms of precipitation in the models. This is September, and this is quite a look, honestly. Not only do we have lots of precipitation in the deep tropics, again, indicative of probably one of two things: rising motion present in the Atlantic, and two, there's probably a lot of moisture out there too, and probably very strong tropical waves this season. But also look at how this tracks. You can kind of almost see that the model is kind of trying to hint at maybe these tropical waves or whatever gets going in the MDR. Instead of it curving out to sea, it kind of takes a westward track straight into the Western Atlantic. And if that's the case, that'll mean lots of problems for not only us in the United States, but all of our friends in the islands and in the Bahamas, and even in Central America and Mexico too. Everybody's at risk potentially this hurricane season. And the CANSIPS has that for August and September. Look at that, August in the Gulf. Maybe a lot of Gulf activity in August. We tend to, especially in active seasons, we've been getting a lot of these late August, very strong major hurricanes that, spin up very quickly, like Idalia, Ida, we've had them, and even Laura too, if we go back to 2020, storms that spin up in the snap of a finger, literally, that have been happening in late August in the Gulf. And maybe you could take this signal, very active Gulf precipitation, maybe hinting at we'll see the same occurring this year. But bottom line, a very active signal on the CANSIPs, and it continues into the late season too. Lots of precipitation in the Caribbean in October and November, and that's where we typically look at for late season development. And I mean, just look at how it looks like for November. Geez, if you're really looking for a signal of any sort of thing, or maybe if you're wondering if the late season will be active at all, the CANSIPs is really giving it to you. Very active look overall for the season. And even if you don't want to take the specifics about what the model is showing, the overall picture is pretty straightforward. And that is that the CANSIPs is hinting at what seems to be a very favorable pattern for this hurricane season. It looks like it'll be very active. It has all the factors in play. We could look at the sea surface temperature anomalies too, and I'll just really quickly zoom through the entire hurricane season on the model and the sea surface temperature anomalies remain very warm throughout the entire deep tropics, especially in the Caribbean, which is probably why they have very heightened anomalies in the precipitation in the Caribbean. But the bottom line is, look at all these anomalies that remain into the late season too in the Atlantic. Overall, a very active signal indeed. And if we take a look at the Pacific really quickly, you could see why too. Very potent La Nina developing. And also look at this too. And if we go back to the sea surface temperature anomalies in the NOAA Coral Reef Watch, notice how they have really quickly, just showing here, you see this off the coast of Mexico, kind of indicative of the cold PDO in the Pacific. So that means not only we'll have a La Nina in place, but we'll have a colder Pacific in general too. And that is kind of what's happening right now. If we look at that, this is for October, and this is happening right now too in the Pacific. We have this cold area off the Baja Peninsula and off the southwest coast of the United States, part of a larger kind of oceanic pattern, the PDO in the Pacific. And when that's cold as well as the La Nina, that really helps concentrate the energy for development and rising motion in the Atlantic. And that's just another plus for the Atlantic too. So really, we're just working with the most favorable factors we can for this hurricane season. And it's definitely going to shape up to be very interesting. And we'll see. We're less than a month away. And so far, things are looking very interesting for this season. And look at that, by the time we get to November, a very potent, seems to be almost basin-wide in the Pacific, a basin-wide La Nina too. So this could be a very potent La Nina that comes in once we get to the late summer and fall, and that'll probably only help fuel the hurricane season in the Atlantic even more. Switching gears though to severe weather, because I talked about earlier, we do have a lot of severe weather ongoing across portions of the United States right now, and that continues today. Unfortunately, there's an enhanced risk for portions of Texas, and that does include a heightened tornado risk too. They even have a hatched area of where we could see potentially significant tornadoes of EF2 strength or higher. So that is something to watch out for, especially if you live in southern Texas. And the wind and the hail chances too seem to be very significant there. So severe weather continues today. Tomorrow it looks like it'll be quieter, but then as we get towards day 3, this is Monday, severe weather expected over the plains, Oklahoma and Kansas, enhanced risk as well. And even if we look at the probability for severe weather, they have a hatched risk too, indicating the chance for significant severe weather that is over the plains. And this is day 3, and they indicate already the chance for potentially very significant severe weather to occur. And it continues as well, not only day 3, but into day 4 and day 5 as well. They have the Storm Prediction Center has areas highlighted over the Midwest, roughly around Illinois, and it seems to be the Tennessee Valley. They have a hatched area and a huge one as well. So this probably means widespread severe weather too. I can already imagine heightened tornado risks and probably the risks for damaging hail and very high gusty winds as well. So take precaution as always. Severe weather season, we're just getting started. We're just getting into the peak of severe weather season, which tends to be around this time. And especially when it comes to tornado season, we tend to get sometimes our most destructive and violent tornadoes in a year recorded around this time too. So don't let your guard down, especially if you're in the risk area for severe weather. Pay attention to what the Storm Prediction Center is forecasting each and every single day. And if not, as well, pay attention to your watches and warnings. And of course, if you have a tornado warning, please seek shelter. And even if you have a severe thunderstorm warning, sometimes these thunderstorms can produce very gusty winds, sometimes upwards of 80, 90, even 100-mile-per-hour gusts. And sometimes that can cause tornadic-like damage, and they can as well spin up brief tornadoes too within some of these longer lines of thunderstorms that move through, instead of the discrete supercells that we get that produce long track violent tornadoes. Severe thunderstorms can be just as bad too as just a small tornado in and of itself. So heed the warnings that you get and pay attention, especially if you're in the Midwest and in the plains, because severe weather will be very active over the next several days, well into next week. And then if we look at days 6, 7, and 8, things begin to quiet down maybe a little bit. Or maybe it's just the fact that we're not looking at we're not looking at clear chances of severe weather right now, but maybe in a few days we'll be able to pick up on something else happening too. So severe weather expected to ramp up. It's only May, and things are probably just getting started. Really quickly though, before I do end, I want to talk about hurricane preparedness because hurricane season is coming up. Obviously, we're less than a month away, as I mentioned throughout the video. But Hurricane Preparedness Week, and this happens every single year, and it's done by FEMA and NOAA. It's basically to raise awareness about preparing for hurricane season, and I strongly recommend that you take this upcoming week, starting tomorrow and lasting till next Saturday, May 5th to May 11th, is known as National Hurricane Preparedness Week. I strongly suggest that over the next week you take a moment to think about hurricane season in terms of preparations. Think about putting together a first aid kit, putting together maybe getting batteries, flashlights, just supplies that you may need just in case some sort of disaster does strike this hurricane season. Maybe not even from hurricanes, maybe it could be tornadoes too that we get, that you need some supplies and you need some first aid. But this also applies to hurricane season as well. And they say here, take action today to be prepared, to be better prepared for when the worst happens. Because oftentimes, if you let your guard down and you do not prepare ahead of time, that is the worst. Because if you're not prepared, you will be scared. But if you are prepared, you don't have really anything to worry about except evacuating. So that is something to take into consideration over the next week. Again, hurricane season is less than a month away, so it's always good to prepare now. Of course, till waiting to the last minute, and then you'll be stuck in a frenzy, and obviously everything will be crazy. But once again, take the next week to really just sit down and think about preparedness. And I might do a video around Wednesday or so, going over things you could do to prepare for the season. Just kind of taking you through it if you're not entirely sure, especially maybe if you just moved to a state where they typically do get hurricane activity during the season, maybe like Florida. I know there's a lot of people moving to Florida and even Texas too. I might do a video this week going over hurricane preparedness. I'll see though. I'll see how my schedule fares out because things do get a little busy for me this week, but we'll see. With that being said, though, I'm gonna wrap it up for this week. Gonna get the video online for you to watch, and hopefully like, comment, subscribe as well. You know, we gotta build the community, as I always say. Share with family and friends too. And with that being said, stay safe, peace, love, and kindness to all, and we'll talk again maybe sometime during the next week.